Thank you for joining us in this month's KeyShot webinar, in which we've partnered up with X-Rite, the parent company of Pantone, to present to you the fundamentals of going from physical to digital and using the X-Rite material scanning system for 3D rendering in KeyShot. My name is Rex Roberts. I'm the lead user experience designer at Luxion, and I'm joined today by Marc Ellens, the senior research scientist at X-Rite. And before I hand it over to Marc, I just have a few formalities to mention. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available at youtube.com/keyshot3d, where you can find lots more excellent learning content to sink your teeth into. Today, I'm just going to be doing a few small demos, but I am presenting on a Box Technologies workstation running Windows 10 Pro. I have an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1950X, which equals out to 32 threads, and I'm running the latest public version of KeyShot 8 Pro, which is 8.2.80. And if you have any questions that come up during the webinar, just ask those in the questions panel. If you're watching this on YouTube, ask in the comments section. We monitor those regularly and always like to see what kind of questions and feedback you guys have there. As a quick introduction, we've had a long-standing partnership between X-Rite and Luxion. We've had Pantone colors in the KeyShot color library since KeyShot 4, so it has been a while. We started supporting AXF files with the measured material in KeyShot 7 and further improve the performance of those in KeyShot 8, and we'll be showing you those today. And we are continuing to support new materials such as transparent, cloudy plastic materials. So yeah, keep an eye out for those in the future. And yeah, so that's it. I'll hand it over to Marc and he can get started on his presentation. Then he'll hand it back over to me to demo some things in KeyShot.
Hello everyone, my name is Marc Ellens. I'm here at X-Rite, and we're going to show you a little bit of what's happening inside of Pantera and how we integrate with KeyShot. So just to get started here, we appreciate the opportunity to do this webinar with KeyShot today. Thank you, Rex, for that invitation. I'm kind of a self-described total appearance capture evangelist. So my job is partly trying to help people understand what measured materials can do for them and how they can interact with them inside of rendering applications. KeyShot has been a long-standing integrator of AXF files, and we're happy to show you some of those things today. So as I move on here, if you don't know much about X-Rite, we are the owners of the Pantone brand. We provide all of the Pantone color standards and the various materials that go along with them, as well as a lot of instrumentation that is designed to do color management, color control, quality control, and other type of color profile construction. So you may have seen the Graytag Macbeth color checker chart. We also are in charge of that brand, and for all your photography and other kinds of needs that and filmmaking needs there. So that's just a little bit about us in case you haven't heard specifically about X-Rite. So to get into some meat here, what we're talking about is digitization of materials. We want to provide a digital twin, a material that is measured and then reproduced faithfully inside of rendering application. Now, we know that we've been making materials for years, and so very good chance that many of you are skilled with how to do that from an artistic process. Maybe even have gotten to the point where you've done a scanner of some kind or a photograph and taken that data and used it inside of your material generation process. What we're aiming for here is a physically correct measured material. So we're constructing this material based on actual measurements that we take, and it's extremely high accuracy, even for complex materials. And the idea is that we want this to be scene independent. So what do we get from an appearance measurement? We get accurate measurement of colors, so very low DE from the original. We get spectral definition. The spectral values are used internally, and then we are just bringing it to a low dynamic range RGB or linear RGB as we export. We can also use gloss parameters that are often used inside of rendering applications. This can be used for a wide variety of materials, translucent plastic, shiny metals, and coatings. And we can capture complex appearance effects like anisotropy and index of refraction for some of these more complex materials. AXF is used across a number of different rendering applications. KeyShot has been one of the early ones and has a very nice integration. So what are we talking about to do measurement here? This measurement ecosystem is built from primarily from the TAC7 material scanner, which you see on the left. This material scanner is a machine that stands by itself. It dumps a lot of data and information into our Pantera software. These images are then composed into an AXF file through a processing procedure that converts all of the images into a model that can be used for rendering. Once that model is built, it can go one of two directions or both directions. The virtual light booth, which we also have as part of our ecosystem. This virtual light booth is capable of showing both the digital material and the physical material in the same lighting environment at the same time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then finally, we export these AXF files into other rendering applications such as KeyShot. So a little bit more detail on the capture scanner. The typical measurement time, 15 to 120 minutes. 120 is the very back end of the amount of time it takes. There is a fairly large amount of photo images taken, anywhere from 20 to 120 gigabytes of raw data. And most of the measurement time is just transferring that data to disk. The post-processing time, typically, depending on the machine that you're using, can be anywhere from 15 to 2 hours. It can take longer than that if your machine doesn't have as many CPUs, but KeyShot tends to like machines with CPUs, and so does the TAC. So that makes us a really good partner with them. And then the final size of an AXF file can be anywhere from 1 to 200 megabytes, depending on how large of an area you've selected to analyze. Inside the TAC, which you don't get to see very often, are a number of cameras, 4 of them to be specific. 32 light sources, a projector for doing structured lighting. This enables us to get height maps and normal maps. We also have a variable linear light scanner, which can help us get really high quality gloss information. We also have a backlight module, which you don't see here. It allows us to get really good alpha maps, a rotation stage, and then a spectrophotometer for making sure that the colors are all consistent. Once all that information is downloaded onto disk. The Pantera software, which I will show you a brief demo of in a couple minutes, allows you to manage this data that we get, as well as processing it into an AXF file format. This AXF file is built on a number of maps which can be used inside of rendering software. Our typical maps are like diffuse, normal, specular, anisotropy, height maps, these kinds of things, which you should be familiar with. The Pantera software allows you to do editing of those maps all at the same time, allowing you to actually build something which is repeatable and useful in the rendering process. It also then can be used. We do have a free viewer application which you can download online you can just search for it, Google for it on our website. This application can be used to evaluate AXF materials and change environments, change objects, and just have a look and see what the AXF files are that you're able to get. So that's in case you're interested. You can download that from our website. And then just a couple words about the virtual light booth. What this is built originally from an SPL-QC light box. We've taken the back off of it and replaced it with a high brightness monitor. This monitor can put out as much light as the light booth can, and so we're able to control the amount of light that you see from your main interaction with this object, both in the virtual and in the physical area. The physical material can be placed in the front on a turntable, and then on the left in the back is a simulation of that same material on an object which you provide, and the positioning and rotation of that object is coordinated both in real life and virtually. We're doing a real-time rendering in the back. There is some potential interest of getting a ray tracer in the back there, so we're looking into that. And this will enable a large number of materials to be simulated back there. We do some kind of sophisticated color management on this device. Not only are we profiling the entire monitor, but we're profiling the monitor according to where your eyes are. And so we're using face tracking to enable us to determine the viewing direction. And then the profile is built for every pixel on the screen, has a different conversion to enable you to get accurate colors no matter which direction you're looking at it from. We also do have an ambient light sensor. This can control things particularly for brightness, to change the monitor to make sure that it's being managed correctly. And then we have closed loop profiling on the monitor to make sure that it doesn't go out of spec. So I've been talking about the AXF file. This is really the file that's produced from this process, and this gets sent to KeyShot for rendering. This file is produced from or consists of a bunch of maps, which I've already mentioned, and this information plus any metadata that you need to store with this file can be stored as a single package. It's essentially a binary version of an XML file based on HDF5, and this is very transportable and can be used in a number of different ways, as well as integrating with your PLM system, for example. So I'll make a final comment here on my actual slides about where we're going, and this is Rex made a comment about this earlier. And what we've recently introduced is the ability to measure transparent plastics, in particular translucent plastics. We're assuming homogeneous plastic composition, and we're asking for a step chip so that we can get various heights and measure them all at the same time. So that's the sample setup. The measurement time is actually very quick, and the processing time also very quick, depending on the machine that you're running, but relatively speaking, very quick. And then we produce a rendering internally right now to show you kind of the results of what we're getting from this translucent measurement. And soon we'll be able to have the real-time rendering inside of Pantera, as well as the virtual light booth and KeyShot as well, hopefully by version 9, which is coming out later. I'll let Rex talk about that. So that's it for my slides. Let me transition over to Pantera here a minute and give you a brief demonstration for how this works. So here in Pantera, we have our standard windows. This set of materials that I have can be organized in a browser window. We can search for them based on material identification or just scan through a set of folders. Once you've identified that you want these materials in the folder to be part of what you're working on, you can just drag and drop them into this material tray here down on the bottom. And it's easy as that. Multiple selection also works. Once you've decided what you want to do, we can switch to the editor tab. And at this point I have, we'll make sure this one is still here. At this point I have inside the editor, I've already loaded a file in here. I can just switch and load a different one pretty easily without too much difficulty. And then on the left-hand side, I have some very simple controls for building a repeat. And this essentially will do cropping area. So I've established my cropping area here. I can change that without any difficulty. The repeat area is updated here in the middle panel. And then on the far right, you see the end result of the changes that you've made using all of the different maps. So in this particular case, I have a diffuse map. Here's the normal map, the specular color map, the roughness map, and the anisotropy map. And these, all of these maps then get combined into a single rendering, which you see here in real time on the far right. This, you can also save a preset. So in this case, I've made some modifications. I will show you some of the differences for what can happen here with these different options. So here's a gradient removal. And over on the far side, I can actually transform my end result here to show you different ways that the material will change if you make those modifications. So in this particular case, I've just swapped materials. One of the options that we have is to provide is texture synthesis. So down here in the material making seamless option, we can actually build a material that's significantly bigger using pieces of our originally selected material. And in this particular case, I can just show you very quickly what happens when you don't select the gradient option and the gradient goes back to the way it originally was, and you can easily see the individual pieces in there. So by adding a gradient low pass, I can swap that out. Once, and I won't go through any other features at this point because I want to hand it back to Rex to do some discussion about KeyShot and the integration. But at this point, once you save this AXF file, this AXF file can be loaded directly into KeyShot. And so with that, that will conclude what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll hang around and be able to answer questions later. So I'll hand it back to Rex.
Awesome. Thanks, Marc. The XRite material system ecosystem is so impressive. And yeah, it was great to get a clear understanding of what the different pieces are and how they work. So for my section of the presentation, I'm just going to go through a few of these bullet points you see here. We do have some new and updated Pantone color libraries, which not necessarily related to the material scanning process, but certainly related to X-Rite and Pantone. So I wanted to talk about those a little bit, show how to use the colors library and the filter colors tool. And then I'm going to demo using AXF files in KeyShot, talk about when to choose scanning versus manual material creation, and then some of the best practices and also some minimum sample requirements that I've found working with this process. So yeah, for those new and updated Pantone color libraries, if you haven't downloaded them yet, you can head over to keyshot.com/assets. I've provided a link to that in the chat section. So you can go ahead and download those and it'll update into your KeyShot 8 library. So the existing Pantone libraries that are in there will get some updates. And then we also have some brand new libraries, including that 2019 Color of the Year and the Fashion, Home, and Interiors collections. So I'll show you those inside of KeyShot in just a bit. Yeah, using the KeyShot colors library is actually a pretty powerful tool that we find that is often overlooked, and many users aren't actually aware that it exists and how to use it. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and also how to use this find perceptual nearest color tool, basically filter your colors library by a sampled pixel. I had created a quick tip on that, which you may have seen already, but I'm going to quickly go over it again. So let me open up KeyShot here and jump right in. So your colors library can be found in the library panel, of course, and you can find some basic material colors, as well as the Pantone color library. So you can see here are some of the Fashion, Home, and Interiors collections that have been added. And what you could do is simply drag and drop a color onto a part in the real-time view or into the materials list or into your scene tree, and it'll retain all those material parameters, your labels, your textures, and simply update the color there. And then you can hover over any of these swatches to see what color you actually have assigned. And you can also use this for, say, your background colors or anywhere you have the ability to change the color in KeyShot, so not just for materials. And then if you're using the colors library kind of as a design tool to find the right color for your product, we do have this tool here, this little crosshairs icon, which you can open up, and then you can either type in a color here, or you can use the eyedropper to sample a color on the screen. And what that's going to do when you select it and say OK, it'll filter the selected folder you have to the 5 nearest colors. So we can go up to the top level Pantone folder, select that crosshairs icon, sample a pixel on the screen, say OK, and then you're presented with those top 5 nearest matching colors, so you can reference those for production if that fits into your workflow. And then for using AXF files in KeyShot, we do have some demo materials that are included in the library in the measured folder, and you can use those as a starting point. You can explore and see how they work, see what kind of parameters are offered for those. Depending on the material, you get a few different parameters there, or you can just start from scratch and change the material type to measured, load in an AXF file, and adjust the mapping. So why don't I show you how to do that? Okay, so if we go over to our materials tab in the library, again, there's a folder for measured, and these are all AXF materials here. So I can just drag and drop that into my scene, and we can get up close here, and then we can double click to edit that material and see the parameters that are presented here. So again, the material type is measured, and that allows you to load in an AXF file here. You have options for mapping. So in this case, I would select to center on part, so that we get the mapping orientation correct there. And then, as I mentioned, depending on the material type, if it has a bump texture assigned, you have a variety of different options here. So you can actually modify these materials, and you're not limited by the AXF file. You can use a little bit of creative freedom to make adjustments on your own. So we can adjust the diffuse tint, maybe the specular tint, if we want this to be more of a red type of metal here. And then we can adjust the roughness. So if you wanted it to be glossy, we can turn that down, or increase the roughness and control the bump height. And then anytime you see a little texture icon next to a parameter, that means it can be textured. So you can right click on that and add in your own custom textures or animate them. So there is a lot of flexibility and a lot of options for modifying these as well. So if we take a look at maybe one of these car paints, you can see what kind of parameters we have for that one. So this one just has a simple bump to it, kind of like an orange peel texture, so we can control that. And then, yeah, if we wanted to start from scratch, let's say this was just a diffuse color brought in from CAD, double click to edit, we would change this to measured, and then we can load in our AXF file. So if I open the browser, I can jump over to some of these, grab one of these leathers, for example, and there you go. Again, you can adjust the mapping. You can adjust the scale if you like. So yeah, it's pretty simple to use the AXF files in KeyShot with the measured material type. And let's jump back over to presentation. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience actually scanning materials, some requests we've received from customers, some material samples that work well for scanning, and maybe some that should be created manually. So it does depend on the material type. As we've discussed, transparent and translucent materials are not currently supported. So for those, you'll create them manually for now. In the future, you can look forward to utilizing the XRite scanner to take advantage of those. It is important to consider that time to scan versus the time to create. So as Marc mentioned, it does depend on your hardware and also the size of the sample that you're scanning. But what I've found is that it takes about 30 minutes or so on average to scan a material. So you'll need to think, is it worth it to take that time to scan the material, or should it be created manually? When you need something that's very accurate, then it absolutely is worth it to take that time to scan. If it's a challenging texture to recreate in KeyShot, then it's absolutely worth the time to scan. But just be aware of you know, the investment from scanning and also creating manually. So yeah, the opaque materials can definitely be scanned. Also, meshes can be scanned. So if, you know, not transparency, but actual opacity, that can definitely be captured with the X-Rite scanner. The repeating geometric patterns are great for scanning. As Marc demoed in Pantera, you can, you know, easily set up those patterns and use the tools in there so you don't see the seams, and yeah, you get some really great results. You can also scan non-uniform organic patterns such as leather, cloth weaves, something like that. But we did receive some requests from customers with, for example, these kind of tarnished metal materials that had fingerprints and stains, and you know, little imperfections that are pretty recognizable. And I would suggest that those should be created manually, because if you have a fingerprint on a piece of metal and you see that same fingerprint being repeated all over, depending on the size of your object, it could get a little distracting and kind of take away from the realistic effect of it. And then as far as best practices and minimum sample requirements, I found that it's important to avoid folds and wrinkles in the material. If you have a piece of fabric that has been crumpled up or folded, and that fold is captured in the scan, then you'll see that fold being repeated when you're scanning it. So it's best that the samples are nice and flat, that if it's something like a metal or a plastic, give it a nice cleaning so that you're not seeing any of those smudges, because the scanner is so accurate that it'll capture all those little imperfections that you might not want in your actual rendering. And this is actually a picture of the scanning bed here, and I would say that the size of the sample you see here, that's probably a good size to use. In some cases, you might not be able to get a sample that large. If it's a uniform material, something like you see here, then you can certainly afford to use a smaller sample to scan. So I would say kind of 2 by 2 inches is a good minimum for something uniform. And then for non-uniform materials, basically the larger the sample is, the better, so that you can have the freedom to adjust that that scanning size and, you know, avoid the repetitions. Again, the gradient removal tools that Marc showed are really powerful and easy to use, and yeah, in most cases it's no problem to you know, make sure that it is a seamless texture, you know, as long as your material sample is nice and flat and clean. And yeah, so that's it for my portion. We can open it up to Q&A, and Marc, you can correct me if I made any mistakes in my presentation, or if you have any other recommendations for minimum sample requirements. So yeah, let's open it up to Josh here to see if we have any other questions to answer.
Yeah, thanks guys. Very, very cool. We have one question right off the bat. If you have a piece of wood you would like to scan, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Mark and I can tag team this one. I'll start, and I would say first it depends on the sample size you have, because there is a limited size to the scanning bed that you can actually fit there. So I believe it is a 3 mm plus or minus from the scanning bed. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes, the main basically the main size dimension that you're dealing with is the width and height is about 4 inches, maybe a little bit more in terms of the square ROI region of interest that you're looking at. That particular size is pretty much ideal, and we should make sure that the materials are at least that size. That being said, measuring wood provides some very interesting difficulties. Usually the grain in the wood is something that you don't really want repeated, and because this unit really wants to or works best under materials that can be repeated within a 4x4 area of interest, it's going to be a little bit difficult. If you're sampling wood that has enough variation in it that the repeats can be glossed over or minimized, then yeah, then you can take pieces of what you've scanned, for example, to handle the lighter areas or the darker areas, or if it's more uniform in appearance, then we can do with texture synthesis. You can spread the grain out and make it look pretty good. As far as what Rex was talking about, the depth of field for the cameras is in fact 3 mm plus or minus off of the edge of the white ring, which is being shown here. And that's the sample bed actually drops about a full inch, and so you can just a little bit over an inch. In fact, you can put in materials that are that fit into that sample bed as long as they come within 3 mm of the white ring. The top of them comes within 3 mm of that. So that's kind of the dimensions that you're working with. And for things that are fairly organic, if they have large distinguishing patterns, right now we're working on other methods to be able to handle that stuff. But if for smaller, kind of more grainy type of things, it should work just fine.
Yeah, and again, I think it's important to just be aware that it is a repeating texture. So if the object you're rendering is the same size as the material sample you're scanning, then there's no problems. You won't actually see that repetition because it's all contained. But if you have, say, a table surface or something much larger, and you're scanning a 4x4 inch sample, then you'll see that 4-inch sample repeating over. And yeah, wood can be a bit tricky with that because it has some clear grain patterns that could be repeated. And if you remove the gradients in those too much, then you kind of lose the effect of the wood. Let's see, it looks like Paul is asking if I have a piece of resin or a resin object, maybe a vase or jewelry, does the scanner capture the swirls inside? So I think one important point to mention there is that the best practice is to use a material sample that is flat, because as soon as you have curvature or folds or facets, then those are represented in the scan. Those are captured in the scan. I think the swirls inside of resin is not currently captured. In KeyShot 8, we're working on supporting translucency and transparency for that kind of material for a later version. Is that correct, Marc?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the translucency, and particularly non-homogeneous translucency, so swirls like you would have inside of a thick plastic or a resin, or inside of like marble, where you have a different type of material that's kind of merged together. Those are really quite difficult to measure and to represent. So it's yeah, it'll be a little bit before we end up being able to capture that and represent it correctly.
Don is asking, how well do bright or fluorescent colors scan? And I think they scan quite well. Would you agree with that, Marc?
Yes.
The sensors in the scanner are yeah, very sensitive and very accurate, and even for bright and fluorescent materials.
Well, yes and no. So dynamic range is really good. So for bright colors, no problem. Right now, there's no fluorescence being captured inside the TAC. That is a temporary limitation, and will be resolved in the not too distant future, because we've had a lot of requests for that. But right now, your fluorescence is not being captured correctly. But bright colors, yes, bright shiny things, and even you know, like really significant yellows and blues and deep colors.
Okay, we have a question from Stefano. How to set up lights in KeyShot to have the best accuracy on color reproduction. So what I would suggest for that is to use Grayscale environments. So the studio folder that you have in the environments library, so that you don't get any effects of you know, the colors from the environment on the accuracy of the material itself. So I think that's pretty simple. Just, yeah, use Grayscale environments to make sure that you're accurately representing those colors. Sergey is asking, what is the cost of the TAC7 scanner?
That will depend a lot on what kind of full system that you have. So there are some ways to reduce the cost depending on the units that you buy. Right now, I believe, and my numbers are not accurate or up to date, but 120,000 was the latest information that I heard. I think it might be a little bit less than that right now. So if you are interested in that, please let me know, and I will get with my sales guy, and we can get some good numbers for you.
Cool. Sergey's mentioning that the download of the Pantone pack didn't work for him. Josh, if you could send him over some links for those, that would be great. Tobias is asking if he can store his own textures in an AXF file format. Seems like a convenient solution regarding ease of use. Yeah, you can, as long as they're scanned using the TAC7 scanner, and you know, you're going through Pantera to capture those to output in the AXF format. I think another important thing to mention is, which you may have mentioned in your section, Marc, is that you can actually export the textures individually from Pantera as well. So for example, if you have a displacement map that you want to use in KeyShot, you can export that from Pantera. So you have a little more flexibility and you get those textures independent from the AXF file.
Yeah, the right now Pantera is the only application which can actually write out AXF files. So it's the only application that you can use to insert textures or to put textures into the file. That's probably not likely going to remain that way in the future. So at this point, you would definitely need Pantera to be able to handle your own maps.
Cool. Someone is asking if there are AXF demo files available online. They found some sample libraries on the X-Rite website. Is there anywhere else you know of that people are sharing AXF files? We can certainly share those on the KeyShot cloud library. I think we would just like to hear a request from our users as to which materials would be most useful. But yeah, Marc, do you know of anywhere else online where you can download samples of AXF files?
I don't know of any yet, although there's been some talk of that. So I guess keep your eyes and ears to the ground, eyes up and ears to the ground to be able to see when that happens. We will be refreshing our demo files to make things a little bit more current and to give some new features and other things and provide those files that might be more interesting. I am not aware of any large clearinghouse of AXF files at the moment.
Okay.
Besides our website.
Yeah. Don is asking if there is a scanning service. And actually, we do have a TAC7 scanner here in the Luxion office in Southern California. So Don, if you're interested in getting some materials scanned, we'd be happy to scan a couple of those so you can kind of validate the scanner before purchasing for yourself. I'm not aware of a scanning service per se. Do you guys offer a comprehensive scanning service, Marc?
Yes, we do. In the Kentwood office in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is our home office, we offer scanning service. Also, if you happen to be overseas, we do that as well in our Zurich office, and then we also have the option to do that in Japan, in Tokyo.
And if someone is interested in that scanning service, how would they find that?
You can just in general go through the website, but also you could let me know. And I'm not trying to determine the best way to share contact information here, but you can contact me directly if you're interested in that.
Okay, and would you like to share your email for that? I think it might have been on your slide, or we can send those directly to the people in the chat that are interested.
Yeah, I think I think I'll just do that. My email is just markellens@xrite.com. So if maybe I can do that in the chat here a minute, and let's see.
Yep, if you just type that in the chat, you can say send to entire audience.
I don't have the option, so
I can do it. Let's
okay.
markellens@xrite.com.
There you go.
Cool.
I will probably put you in touch with one of our sales guys who can help put together the right format and get you the details and information that you need to be able to send the samples in.
Cool. Dale is asking about the light booth and if the turntable is in sync with the image displayed on the screen. So as you rotate the physical, that the rendered images rotates as well.
Yes, it is. It can be optionally inverted or rotate the same direction. So there are reasons to make it inverted, which have to do with color management and color accuracy. And then if you really did want to make them rotate in sync, then you can, or at the same, rotate in the same direction, then you can do that as well.
Cool. Stephanie is asking if KeyShot procedural textures can be applied to AXF materials. So if we jump back into KeyShot here, you can see we have the AXF properties, but then you also do have some texture options and labels as well. So you can combine, depending on the material type, you can indeed combine some procedural textures from KeyShot with the AXF materials. And then Nathan is asking if AXF files include displacement, and I believe they do, but
yes,
currently we can't, we don't have support to take advantage of those in KeyShot from the AXF file. So you would actually export the displacement map as a separate image texture and combine that in KeyShot with the displacement material graph node. Cool. Well, I'm so happy to see that there's a lot of interest in the material scanning and the XRite ecosystem. Yeah, thank you, Marc, for partnering up with us for this webinar. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found this content to be interesting and valuable. If you're interested in more learning content like this webinar, head over to youtube.com/KeyShot3D, where you'll find a recording of this webinar in the next day or two. While you're over there, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're notified whenever we post new video content. If you are interested in that scanning service, please reach out to Marc. And yeah, from the Luxion and X-Rite team, enjoy the rest of your day and happy rendering.